Welcome to Frontlines. We'll give everybody a brief moment to do their shares and cross posts before we get started. Welcome. And we again thank the Armenian Bar Association, Aspares News, the Honorary Consulate of the Republic of Armenia, and CivilNet for cross-streaming in our program today. And of course, we're going to welcome our viewers from across the United States and Canada, Europe and the Middle East, Australia, and of course from Armenia and Artsakh. We are glad to be with you again. Since September 27th, 2020, the security and future of the Armenian nation, the viability and self-determination of Artsakh, and the stability and very sovereignty of the Armenian Republic itself has been in a constant state of turmoil and trepidation. It has been and remains a story of really unending nightmares, a devastating war, thousands of young soldiers dead, thousands more wounded, hundreds missing, tens of thousands displaced, families destroyed, endemic psychological trauma, the storming of the National Assembly and violence in the streets, POWs tortured, POWs still 4 months after the ceasefire, not released by Azerbaijan, ongoing threats against Armenian villages, and a border demarcation process marked by irregularity, confusion, and even mistrust. And now, a constitutional crisis. In the last week, the Prime Minister fired the head of the General Staff of the Armenian Armed Forces, and what has transpired every day since has driven the Armenian political system to the brink, has exacerbated tensions between the opposition and the governing party, and has spilled out into the streets in anything but velvet. There is much to discuss, and our guest today will help us unpack all of this to dissect the constitutional moment that we find ourselves in. We find ourselves again at perhaps the most crucial moment in time for the Armenian nation in a generation. Garo?
Thank you. Good day everywhere. Good morning in Artsakh, good morning in Yerevan, and good evening in the United States, and good day everywhere else. Our guest this evening in Western Hemisphere and this morning from Yerevan is none other than Levon Gevorgyan. Levon Gevorgyan is a senior manager and the head of the law practice for the global organization Ernst & Young, EY, in Armenia. Levon is a licensed advocate with experience before national and international courts. He combines over 10 years of professional practice in both private and public sectors. A licensed advocate with experience before these national and international courts, he has advised and represented foreign investors and local businesses in Armenia on matters ranging from cross-border M&As, corporate structuring and project finance, to strategic litigation, competition law, and investor-state disputes. His industry concentrations are infrastructure, mining, banking, and finances, telecom, and IT. Prior to joining EY, Levon has held a key management role in a Tier 1 Armenian law firm. He has taught public and international law and private international law at various universities of Armenia and is a frequent speaker on legal developments and the investment environment in Armenia. He holds a PhD from Yerevan State University, Faculty of Law, has an LLM from American University, Washington College of Law, as well as Bachelor and Masters of Laws degrees from Yerevan State University. Currently a member of the working group in charge of constitutional amendments in Armenia, Levon frequently advises the government and state agencies on legislative reforms. Previously, Levon has been a member of the working group of the Chamber of Advocates that provided expert opinion to the 2015 constitutional amendments and was appointed by the President of the Republic of Armenia as a member of the advisory board in charge of proposing candidates for the vacant position of a judge at the Constitutional Court. And I have to say that personally, as I said off the air, I've been very fond of Levon for a number of years, ever since I first had an opportunity to hear him speak and present in Paris in early April of 2015 at a conference. His brilliance has only been surpassed by years of seasoning And I am extremely delighted that he was able to join us this early morning from Yerevan. Levon, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Levon, I'd like you, if you would, to take us back a little over a week and walk us through kind of the key events and the key reactions and explain where we are at this present moment in this current constitutional crisis so our viewers can kind of understand in context what we're talking about.
Right. Before going to there, probably two disclaimers about myself. I'm not anymore a member of the working group on the constitutional amendments. I opted to quit after November 10. The other part is probably that I will have to state is that my appearance on social platforms has nothing to do with my direct employer and affiliation with the global consulting firm. So yeah, I'm pretty much talking in my private personal capacity. As for the developments, it all kickstarted from the decision of the Prime Minister to dismiss the deputy head of staff for the military, which basically backlashed with a series of events, with the military demanding basically the retirement of the PM, of the Prime Minister, which followed up with the decision of the Prime Minister to submit to the President a proposal to dismiss the head of staff for the military, which the President has returned, stating that in his position, in his opinion, there are certain issues pertaining under constitutional law. Pretty much the reference that was made in the statement was to the fact that Armenia still is in a situation of a martial law, state of emergency. And according to the President, at least, the dismissal of the head of staff in these circumstances is not a usual affair or a daily appointment or dismissal arrangement under which could be under normal circumstances, and therefore the President basically returned the submission by the Prime Minister. But then the Prime Minister resubmitted the proposal once again, which under the Constitution basically gives two things to the President to do, either to approve it or to refer the question to the Constitutional Court. What the President chose to do instead is the President chose not to sign the proposal, but it didn't. The President didn't refer to the Constitutional Court the submission made by the Prime Minister. Instead, the President opted to raise the issue of constitutionality of the law on the military service and the status of the military personnel. The statement doesn't say which specific provision of the law is being referred to the Constitutional Court. Most probably it's Article 40, last paragraph of Article 40, which provides for the pretty much a discretionary power of the political authorities to appoint and dismiss the heads of the military staff. And we can talk about that in more detail further on.
If I can just follow up real quickly, because I know Garo has a question to get in here, but just really quickly, there was talk in the press, and really one of the major flashpoints, if you will, was a discussion that what the response that came from the military is essentially an overture towards a military coup. That was the early talk of this week. What are your impressions on that in terms of the weight of that type of rhetoric?
Look, the deputy head of staff is currently challenging the decision on his dismissal before the administrative court. To be honest, it doesn't strike me like an action one would do during a coup d'etat. So basically, if you're challenging the legality of the decisions of the political political leadership before courts, it's hardly a coup. Probably it was in someone's interest to represent it as a coup. I don't know. Of course, there can be a risk that the situation may escalate, and I'm not in a position to speculate on that. But at least as the things are happening right now, it's definitely not a coup d'etat. At least that's my personal understanding.
May I, Karnig? I tend to agree with you. I was concerned when I first heard the announcement, the demand for resignation. But quickly it became apparent to me, given the lack of traditional steps that are taken in a coup d'etat situation, the lack of those steps made it even more clear that it was, for lack of a better term, an exercise of freedom of expression by the military, voicing its vote of no confidence, if you will, and based on that, seeking what it sought. What I want to ask you is, I'm really taken by your ability to put so much information out in a short amount of sentences and words put together. And you just maybe, I don't want to say it was yesterday, may have been the last few days. You had series of social media posts, which my English translation for our audience, because this program thus far has been in English, is on one occasion you wrote, if one day, I really loved what you wrote, if one day I disgracefully lose the case or a case of one of my clients in court, as a result of which my client suffers huge losses, or I poorly negotiate, as a result of which the transaction is a failure due to my negligence, or despite lacking the necessary knowledge, my bravado and talking big ends up, in producing the loss, I'm going to grab and gather all my friends and stage a protest with my colleagues. You never know, you said. So, looking at this and doing my level best to be nonpartisan and just being concerned with the welfare of the Republic, regardless of political waves, government, pro-government, opposition, I really, want to leave that out of the equation. One would take, at least I took this as perhaps a very sharp-tongued criticism of both current government and also opposition or the deficiencies in the opposition that obviously so far hasn't produced the outcome that the opposition intends to. So if I may say, and if you care to, but you don't have to, what did you mean by that statement, Levon? I mean, it's a lot there, right?
Well, to put it shortly, I basically meant that people need to grow up and to take responsibility for the acts and the missions that they do, and that's who, if not us lawyers, understand the importance of responsibility towards individuals for which we work and for which we undertake a certain form of liability and whom we represent. So basically what happened 3 years ago in 2018 was pretty much, at least I believe a lot of people within this country feel that they have been bereft of their hopes and of their own goals, and whatever intentions they could have had with the change of the government, which obviously, at least during the past 2 or 3 years, proved to be a complete disaster, at least at the level of the readiness of the ruling groups to undertake responsibility. And one of the most catastrophic things that probably we're witnessing right now is the proclivity and the tendency to pretty much justify everything, and sometimes at the expense of national interests, just to justify the decisions of or the decisions of the political leadership. We're basically seeing that, and that is probably one of the most painful parts of it with respect to the borders and the demarcation issues and statements pertaining to internationally recognized borders, claims that not a single inch of Sunni has been seized to the enemy, etc., etc. So this is kind of a rhetoric which is peculiar to people which do not want to undertake liability, and with the subsequent consequence of damaging the national interests. That is a fact.
You brought up the borders, and you did opine as to that. You did talk about. You kind of referred to an article, I believe it was earlier today, at iravapan.net, where you said that you read the article, and it turns out that in the same interview, the individual is saying a number of things, saying that we don't give up a single inch in Sunni, but then says drawing maps with GPS is okay, and it's just one way of doing things. But if that's the case, we all know that the human rights defender, Ombudsman Arman Tatoyan, has been the calmest man I've known for a number of years, is now showing a bit of his frustration, and rightfully so, at the real utter lack of proactive engagement by different government entities and agencies and perhaps ministries, allowing the situation to day by day deteriorate, to result in outrageous amount of human rights violations. And then I don't know, I didn't have time to see who was the article referring to that you very well again pointed out that, wait a minute, this seems to be talking from both sides of their mouth, this individual. Was that a government official speaking, or was that some...
I believe that's a member of the parliament, but since we basically, these days, we come to know the members of the parliament due to the fact that they make historical and stupid statements. That's probably the sole reason that we learn about their names and their individuality, and nothing more than that. They've been sitting there for 2 years and no one has ever known, no one has ever noticed their existence. Now it's the prime time for us to learn because now they have something to say.
And they certainly don't seem to be shy about it, if only they said things that were consistent and in line with the situation on the ground. Karnig?
I want to springboard off of the initial post that you were referring to, Garo, and ask Levon you a question. It is I would say historically peculiar, at the very least, that after a government loses a war of this magnitude, an existential war, which is what the government called it at the beginning, and still maintains power. I know one of the main issues that have been struggling back and forth, at least in the discussions, really has a very, I think, formidable constitutional overtone. And I want to ask about that. How does the Armenian constitution, which was recently amended not too long ago, to move us from a presidential system to a parliamentary system? I guess there's two parts to this question. First, how is the constitution, how is the party in power, the government in power, how are they supposed to deal with a renewed mandate of the people, number one, technically? And the second question I have is, doesn't a democratically elected government realize that at this particular historical moment that we're in, that a renewal of that mandate of the people is important? So I guess my questions are two. The first is, what is the technical mechanism? Is there one in the current constitution? And then secondly, perhaps it's more of a personal opinion in terms of, doesn't the proper functioning of government require them, the ruling party, to go back to the people and get a renewed mandate?
Look, without going into very specific details of the constitutional regulations, I would like to highlight the following. The past 2 or 3 years have shown that the parliamentary governance is something that the Armenian society is not ready for. In fact, and in practice, it has basically mutated into a one-party ruling system, which is very much reminiscent of the Soviet era. And it appears that on many occasions, the most important issues are not decided within the parliament, but during party meetings or party gatherings. And that also basically means that what you have in practice is a situation where there is a one-man authority and a leading individual who has gathered the party around himself, and not, let's say, a group of individuals that have collected or gathered around a certain idea or a goal. It's basically a gathering around an individual, and the final outcome is, due to the fact that they have 70+% within the parliament, any kind of a democratically viable solution is not going to work here, because the constitution is not ready to provide for an answer. You basically have a situation where both the parliament and the government are directed by the same will, and that's basically the end of the story. My personal view, when I was still part of the working group for the constitutional amendments, was that we need to switch to a purely presidential form of governance, not to the semi-presidential one which we had during before 2015, but to a purely presidential one, because in such a form of governance, the president, as the head of the government, is going to also undertake the political liability and responsibility for the acts that he's doing. Unlike the situation that we had prior to 2015, where it was also always the prime ministers that were responsible, but not the presidents. Presidents were some sort of a, an individual in an ivory tower, which was immune from any sort of criticism. Whenever the government would fail, the solution was to change the prime minister. That's why we would see lots of changes to the prime ministers, but never a critical approach coming from within the parliament towards the president and the government as a whole. Now, for some reason, and it's also very interesting that during the last gathering, the prime minister has announced that now he wants to switch back to the semi-presidential form of governance. It seems to me that that form of governance is simply, well, one thing, constitutional amendments are now being presented to the people as some sort of a solution to the crisis. I don't think that the current day crisis can be solved via or by means of constitutional amendments. We do need constitutional amendments, but not right now, and not in this turmoil, and not in this condition of social divide that we're facing within the Armenian society, because the level of divide is insane. That level of divide was probably one of the main reasons why I decided to opt out of the working group, because every idea that we would come up with would basically be attacked from political viewpoint. Even if you would come up with proposals which were purely legal, theoretical, etc., based on statistical data, the conversation was never a scholarly one. The conversation was always a political one. And in this situation of divide, I don't think that constitutional amendments are a reasonable way forward, because any change of government that would follow after that is going to, the new government is going to trigger new constitutional amendments. So the changes that are proposed right now, they are not viable. As to the second question, I think they need to just show the political maturity and to acknowledge the situation that the country is currently in. I think part of the problem is due to the ongoing, never-ending intention to hide from the people and from the electorate the real factual circumstances that the nation is basically facing right now. Instead of telling the people that, the border, the situation at the border is basically forced upon us, and there is nothing we can do at this point, we're claiming that we haven't ceded anything, and pretty much creating a situation where we may face an estoppel or be bound by rules of acquiescence in the future. And that also means disastrous outcomes from public international law perspective for the nation. And that is only one very specific incident, and there are so many of those. But at least it seems like the general conversation is going towards the elections within this year, within 2021. I really do hope that is going to be the case, because this nation needs to get a breather, and the elections could be one of the new starting lines.
Levon, you said they need to show political maturity. Without getting into the they, I think every actor in the political stage can use a bit more maturity, whether it's government or opposition. It's very disturbing. I was born and raised in Beirut, and I remember back then, long ago, and even now, you're very correct. Parliamentary forms of government, when government is not performing as the people expect it to perform, all of a sudden the prime minister resigns, and they try and form a new government. But here in Armenia, or here meaning in our ancestral homeland, at least for us, it seems that the opposition parties within government, to the extent that they seek to agendize something, oftentimes they don't have the requisite number of votes, because the majority being really what I consider perhaps even a super majority, blocks any efforts at having meaningful discussions. And then the meaningful discussions, even if they are had, they are beyond combative. I follow quite a bit of those sessions, and they go nowhere. They get nowhere. Now, consequently, you have protests, and you have 17 parties or 15 parties or 100 parties, doesn't matter, people on the streets. And then there's talk about, well, they don't represent the majority of the population. And the other side says, well, yes, we do. You guys are not allowing us to have our supporters come to the square. And it's mudslinging like there's no tomorrow. Mudslinging, use of language, and pejoratives. I want to talk about two words: forgive and forget. There is no question to me that right now, society is neither willing to forgive, whatever the shortcomings are. There's a segment that says, oh, all of this is because of the prior government's shortcomings going back 20 years. And there's a segment that says, excuse me, you inherited it, you wanted it, you got it, and you've been on it for 2.5, 3 years. You should have made an assessment and acted accordingly, and it's on your watch. And therefore, if it's on your watch and the ship sinks, regardless of, who did not maintain the ship, you should have taken a good look to see if the ship is saleable or not. So the forgiving part is clear that nobody is willing to forgive the other, assuming, their concerns are well-founded. The forgetting part is a bit troubling to me, because just yesterday I had a conversation with some relatives of mine who are there from Europe, but they happen to be at their home there. And I was told that, an alarming number of establishments in Yerevan seems like life is going on. Like there's nothing wrong. People are going to the restaurants and having their get-togethers and parties or whatever the case may be. That's disturbing. That's disturbing given the fact that, when I consider flying to Yerevan and going to Stepanakert, I'm told that, I may have issues getting there, and that not only I may have issues, I not being a citizen of Armenia, but others who are citizens of Armenia are not able to freely travel to the even the territories that are currently controlled by the Republic of Artsakh, but obviously influenced by the peacekeepers. Where do you see us going today? Forgive me, I rambled on quite a bit. Where do you see us going if we were to turn the page? I mean, how many days of these protests in front of the parliament with snipers, stationed can go on without a tipping point, which, I certainly, and I don't think anyone that cares about homeland or human life would care to see it escalate. Where do you see an out from this, what I consider an impasse that I don't see a solution to?
Well, in all honesty, I do not really think that there is going to be a tipping point due to the, well, as you said, there are like 10,000 people at one gathering. There are 6,000 people at the other gathering. And how about people who just simply want to work and want some sort of security, want education for their children, and want to live their daily lives? And that is pretty much the predominant majority. Even during the day where there were like tens of thousands of people in those two gatherings, you would see a lot of people simply living their lives. And there were definitely the majority. So to me, this seems like two groups at least struggling for power, with the predominant majority of the population do not really caring about who is at the top of the pyramid, because whatever this thing has to be built from down up. It's never going to be built from up down. And I don't really think that the candidates on the both sides are really proposing viable solutions, both because they are not talking about any solutions as of now, and because they already had their chances, all of them. Well, the comparison that I usually make, and you talked about the fact that they undertook these, they took the government without really understanding the risks. To me, this looks like like an M&A without a proper due diligence. So they decided to purchase an asset without doing a due diligence, and then they figured out that a lot of assets that the company has have complicated legal issues pertaining to them. But the thing is that the former owners used to solve those legal issues based on their own contacts, corruption, call it whatever you want. But then you jump in and tell everyone, okay, from now on, we're doing everything in a different way. And then you start losing everything. And who says that after 3 years of losing everything, you have a capacity to change things in different ways? So the sole solution, and I believe this has been the proposal by various organizations, or various groups, seems to me a transitional technocratic government of specialists that is going to rule the country for a year or two, till the moment that everything is settled and things come back to normality. Without that, this is going to be just an endless chaos. I wouldn't say even chaos, just an endless,
a replay of yesterday, tomorrow, and the day after. It's like the movie The Groundhog.
Yeah, but without a tipping point, because it seems to be like an ongoing process which may protract for days, weeks, and months, just dragging the nation into this endless nightmare, and that's it.
And Levon, oh, sorry.
Go ahead. But one of it's right on cue. Okay. One of our longtime followers, Siamanto, has written, have you considered running for public office? And with that, I pass it on to you, Karnig.
Well, I think if anything, that's a call for professionalism, because Levon, you exude that, and we appreciate that very much. And going back to, I guess when you and I first met back at the same conference that Garo was referring to, I'd like to tap in to your knowledge on international law, because I did also meet you at the conference in Paris in 2015, where you were speaking on issues of international law. And where I want to, what I want to discuss, if we can briefly, and it's no secret that I often bring the conversation back to Artsakh, and I want to bring it back there right now, because in this protracted malaise that we're seeing, really since the signing of the ceasefire, it seems as if Armenia's role in driving the Artsakh train, or the Artsakh bus, if you will, they've taken their hands off the wheel. It is moving, perhaps much like the border issue, without any significant input, it seems, from the Armenian side. Maybe there's a lot going on back channel, I don't know. But in terms of the outcomes of what we're seeing, the traditional role of Armenia as the protector, not just of the physical security, but also really of the diplomatic voice of the people of Artsakh, seems to have waned. My question to you is, what do you see transpiring over the next several months if that type of approach continues? Because I think it should be clear to everybody, and maybe we were not awakened to the issue prior to the war, but I think everybody understands that Russia is there for Russia's interests, and yes, they may coincide with Armenian interests, at least in the immediate sense. The long-term interests are particularly Russian. What does that mean for Artsakh and the people of Artsakh and their ability to have a voice in the process? I mean, it's really gotten to the point where you wonder if anybody's watching what's happening in the backyard.
Yeah, well, the short answer is nothing good is going to come out of this if this goes on like in the way that we've been watching during the past couple of months. The positive thing, probably, which is not something that gets a lot of publicity, is that at least the Republic of Armenia has been rather proactive in terms of judicial proceedings and in terms of claims under various international instruments, which unfortunately are not going to give short-term outcomes. They're going to have mid-term or long-term outcomes, and the work that the lawyers are basically doing has to be backed somehow by also diplomats and political decision makers, whose statements and whose rhetoric, at least at this stage, doesn't seem to be very, very promising, because, well, a lot of politicians have now somehow opted to talk about the options of reconciliation, possibility of mutual trade, transit, cross-border sales of goods or whatever, which is, to my mind, it's complete nonsense. In a situation where you have, unpunished Ramil Safarovs in the neighboring nation, in a situation where you have the president of the neighboring nation basically spitting out anti-Armenian xenophobia on a daily basis, any talk about the potential reconciliation is basically nonsensical. It's not going to bring anywhere. So the way that I see outside of this is basically vested in judicial settlements, in judicial venues, and before the fora of international also political organizations, but definitely not in the way that is happening right now. So things have to change.
What are your thoughts, Karnig, may I?
Please.
What are your thoughts on the situation with the POWs? I mean, you're a very skilled litigator and a negotiator. Is there something that, you know, is being missed, that is an obvious path that could be taken that's not being taken?
Well, here's the thing. There are things that are that can be seen, and there are things that are not made public. Mm-hmm. So things that can be seen are definitely the enormous number of motions filed with the European Court of Human Rights, both by the government, the agent before the European Court of Human Rights, and private advocates who have been bombarding the European Court on a daily basis. Unfortunately, as disastrous as it may appear, the Republic of Azerbaijan has basically even violated its obligations under the European Convention, even after interim measures have been applied. So even there are certain incidents where individuals that have been identified, definitely identified by the European Court of Human Rights, and interim measures have been applied and have been returned in basically bags, murdered and tortured. So that is a terrible situation. But the other forum that needs to be very proactively used is, of course, the United Nations. What is being done there, I'm not really sure. The Republic of Azerbaijan has been filing letters claiming that the individuals that are being held, as a matter of fact, being held hostage on the territory of Azerbaijan are terrorists, saboteurs, mercenaries, etc. Some of the memorials that are being circulated are extremely ridiculous in their content. For example, one memorial basically has a disclaimer at the beginning saying that it is compiled based on media coverages. And then you check the media coverages, it appears it's Turkish and Azerbaijani media that they are referring to, and coming with the conclusion that these individuals are terrorists. Whether that is being responded in a proper manner, I'm not really sure. I don't want to be too critical and judgmental, but I'm not really sure. What has been done before TASE, before the Council of Europe, Parliamentary Assembly, I think that was disastrous. Basically, the representatives there didn't even manage to convince the Parliamentary Assembly to put the item on the agenda of the Assembly. And that is a terrible failure. Whether that was due to their inability, or whether that was due to the corrupt nature of the politicians and decision makers in Europe, it doesn't really matter. It's a failure, full stop. And there is, of course, the negotiations, the political negotiations, three-party negotiations that cannot be seen. And I'm honestly not in a position to comment on those because basically I have no information, as nobody else does.
You know, Levon, I wanted to ask that, you know, specifically, again, I want to go back to the, you know, in the ceasefire agreement, or the ceasefire statement, there was a, you know, that 5-year window until, you know, with respect to the peacekeepers being present to protect the line of contact. It looks as if political change, we refer to it, the malaise that has set in Armenian politics, perhaps even apathy, or at some point people are even just tired of it all. And we spoke earlier on, before we got on, regarding, you know, the statements coming out of various individuals from the parliament and otherwise, which really seems to have expressed, you know, I'm going to be diplomatic about it, perhaps even a lack of really appreciation of the actual historical context of the Artsakh situation. Aren't we running up against time? I'm not hearing any solutions. I'm not hearing. I mean, it seems as if any government would have trouble, let's say, dealing with one or two of these issues. They're really significant issues, right? Border demarcation, POWs. I mean, these things are issues that, governments rise and fall on these issues. Here we have a government that is dealing with all of them and really not really dealing with all of them. And those things are just happening. And like you said, the question becomes, is the rhetoric straightforward? That seems to be a theme that everybody is concerned with globally, coming out of even during the war, quite frankly, near the tail end of the war, there were questions regarding the information coming out. And here we find ourselves in a situation where if this is protracted, do we find ourselves in a situation where we are not going to, let me ask two very simple questions. What is the best case scenario, not with respect to Artsakh final status, but what is the best case scenario in dealing with the Artsakh Iravijag, if you will, right now, the current state of affairs? What is the best approach that a properly interested and functioning government could be taking or should be taking? I'm very concerned about that because I feel as if the voice of the people of Artsakh clearly is not on the table, not on any table that matters, and Armenia's inability to press really leaves the people of Artsakh at the whim of all the other players, and it seems extremely precarious to me.
Yeah, well, at least the thing that I have in mind is maybe the fact that I'm a lawyer is due to that fact. I may be biased towards legal solutions to a certain extent, as opposed to political solutions. But in all honesty, the political solution has proved to be a disaster. I mean, the Republic of Armenia has relied on the so-called Minsk Group as a guarantor for the peace in the region for decades. And through that reliance has basically refrained from major significant legal actions that could have been undertaken prior to that. And that has proven to be a disaster. So my personal opinion, and probably I'm coming back to what I already said, is through bombarding Republic of Azerbaijan based on various international instruments and various claims, use of mercenaries, the Convention on the Prohibition of the Use of Mercenaries, the Convention on Prohibition and Financing of Terrorism, the Convention on the Elimination of all forms of racial discrimination, interstate claims before the European Court of Human Rights. These, of course, as I said, are long-term initiatives, but final findings or judgments under those instruments, I believe, may be game changers. So imagine a situation where there is a ruling by the International Court of Justice saying that the Republic of Azerbaijan has basically, and I'm talking theoretical, of course, but imagine a situation where there is a judgment saying that the Republic of Azerbaijan has basically funded terrorism. What is going to be the outcome? The outcome is going to be pretty much the fact that it's going to be cut off from any foreign support, be it military or any other form. Imagine a situation that you have a finding by some judicial institution that the Republic of Azerbaijan is basically a racist regime, following up with a spreading anti-Armenian xenophobia. Wouldn't such a judgment or finding by some international organization pretty much also contribute to the potential recognition of the Republic of Artsakh by at least a couple of European nations?
I think, you know what, Levon, I think that point is extremely well taken. I think our viewers should understand that if there's been any bright line in the last several months since the war began, has been really the legal team and the legal wins. It has been very forceful, and I have to say, commendable, to all the attorneys that worked on it, and your colleague Nյութի Gevorgyan has led the fight at the European Court, and I know that there are others. Siranush Sagyan is another one who is very much involved. Your involvement as well. It has been a stellar performance. Let's make no bones about it. I mean, it has been a constant run of victories, which will have long-term, medium-term, and long-term consequences. And so I think it's important for our viewers to know that in all of the political turmoil, there's been a real clear direction with respect to setting the international stage with respect to international law and human rights law on this issue, and that is extremely commendable. I just wanted to make that clear because I know that there's so much on our plates to discuss. There is a real bright light shining in that perspective, and I commend you, Yerishe, Siranush, and the others on the team, which are many, and I haven't mentioned them all, but that has been a real ray of hope in this moment.
I want to interject, if I may, and say this. When you have the option between legal solution or a political solution, maybe it is also because I too am a lawyer, obviously, and maybe that is the leaning. But I think really, whether you're a lawyer or not, a legal solution is one that carries with it precedential value. It relies on precedents versus a political solution. Political solution is whatever the parties agree to without rhyme or reason oftentimes. And, as we all know, in politics, your enemy's enemy is my friend, and all of those nuances that change the situation from day to day. You mentioned earlier, this will be my last inquiry before Karnig gives me closing remarks for a minute. You mentioned the word estoppel. And in as much as you talked about estoppel earlier, when you fail to act, you may be stopped from acting in the future because you may be deemed to have waived some rights. When we talk about Artsakh, and when we talk about the border demarcation processes in the Sunni Kerkonian regions, clearly the violations are there. We understand the road, that starts one place, and before you get to the second place in between, all of a sudden there's an Azeri flag and an Azeri sign saying "Welcome to Azerbaijan," and then that lends itself for them to say, well, that we have soldiers there to guard those items, unless a legal action is undertaken as to those, and folks rely on political solutions. At some point, the same with Artsakh, with the use of the chemical weapons or munitions that were prohibited, with the torture of the civilians, with the 62 or some other captured and held hostage the day or two after the ceasefire. All of a sudden, they were supposed to have magically disappeared. They were there on the ground when the ceasefire occurred. They had not yet returned to their bases, if you will. All of those, unless legal action is taken, the real concern is that you may be stopped one day because you are on notice. Clearly you are on notice. Do you currently, Levon, have zero engagement in these legal processes because you've taken yourself from the public service aspect of it? I can't imagine you not having off-the-record discussions, intellectual discussions, if you will, because I would urge you to reconsider, at least perhaps as a civilian, participating in some fashion, because I think you bring quite a bit to the table.
Well, at least in the litigation processes, I can say I have a certain advisory involvement. As to the statements of the politicians, there is no way to influence them. I'm not really sure that they're willing to listen at all.
And you know what? I think that might be another point, really, as we kind of get to the end of our discussion today, is that the other reason why I think, and I feel that both of you will agree with this, another reason why the legal avenues are the most formidable at this stage is not only do they create precedent, but also it seems as if the political avenues are paralyzed. That's a word that we've been hearing for quite an amount of time with respect to the political processes, that it is paralysis. And it's paralysis, people come up with 101 reasons why there's paralysis, but the reality is that there's paralysis. There's very little movement. And like you just said, Levon, it's hard, it seems like it's hard to convince. We know obviously, as I mentioned, the legal work being done has had tremendous successes. And I think everybody on this program that has viewed this program and throughout Armenia and the diaspora can understand and appreciate the role that Arman Tatoyan has played in pushing a lot of these issues. His mandate has grown because of the vulnerability of the Armenian citizen in the post-war period. So I think what we're seeing is we have to take the avenues that we have available to us that we can actually move forward on, and quite frankly, as a Class A nation. We've had tremendous successes in these international courts. And on the contrary, Azerbaijan has had a series of failures in the international court. So I think that says something about what direction the future may hold if we can hold it together, quite frankly, in the political sense. Levon, I want to give you the kind of some closing thoughts, if you will. We try to keep our programs under an hour. I just wanted to give you some last words before Garo wraps up our program for today.
Only if he promises to come back for part 2, because there's a lot more we need to get from this young but very wise in terms of maturity and command of law and logic. Only if you promise. You don't get a last word. You have to promise to come back for a part 2 soon.
Well, that I do, of course. Thanks a lot for the kind words. I would like to elaborate a bit on the issue of estoppel that Garo made there. During the past 20 years, the statements that have been coming from the Azerbaijani side were usually so shocking that we usually neglected them as being insane or stupid. Claims that Sunik or Zangezur is part of Azerbaijan, claims that Sevan is part of Azerbaijan, claims that Yerevan is part of the historical Western so-called Western Azerbaijan. And as insane as those claims could have sounded, those people had a strategy all time long. They had a strategy, and they always kept their potential claims, no matter how insane those claims are. They kept their claims active, and we love saying that the Republic of Azerbaijan has been built having Armenia in their mind, right? They try to duplicate us in all matters, but it seems like they've gone ahead. It seems like now it's time for us to learn from them in many aspects, especially in terms of having a long-term plan for the way that this country is going to survive this calamity, and also to reactivate its international claims under international relations and public international law. Because what we're facing right now, it's a day-to-day life. There is obviously not a long-term plan. That's at least not with the government, at least not now. So we need a long-term plan for this to get out of this. I'll probably stop there.
Thank you, Levon. Garo?
Well, it was Levon's birthday this week, so I want to wish you a belated happy birthday.
Thank you.
And I want to close by echoing that which apparently, as you have said on your social media, that the most common wish on your birthday, and I won't give your age, that's for you. The most common wish on your birthday was peace in different formulations. Everybody wished peace in their own way. My wish for you is continued strength and continued perseverance, because you certainly have had both the number of years that I've watched you from afar and from close by. Also, not just for you, but also strength and persistence for all those who on the ground with you and close and far are working day and night, 7 days a week, to achieve that peace with pride, however, and not peace at the expense of our martyrs, not peace at the expense of our martyrs who built our nation, whether it was the independence movement of 1988, the Garo movement, the independence of 1991, and certainly not at the expense of the great deal of sacrifice, 1.5 million martyrs of the Armenian genocide, the first republic of 1918, not peace at the expense of the young men and women who have suffered in Artsakh and continue to hold the ground, that sacred ground. I do wish peace unto you, Levon, and unto all of us for the sake of all the sacrifices that have been made. And I will say this, for the sake of not the present generation, but really for future generations, I ask that all parties, all sides who believe their side is the right side, their way is the right way, they have to all stop and take a look and ask themselves, look in the mirror, what do I want? Whatever it is I want, if the other person wants it as well, but the means to get there is different, find common ground and let us all get there together and not kill each other spiritually, emotionally, and God forbid physically while trying to get there. Levon, have a pleasant weekend.
Thank you so much.
And I really look forward for part 2 under better circumstances, hopefully. Karnig, that's
Thank
it.
you. Thank you very much, Garo, and thank you very much, Levon. We will take you up on the offer that was put right in your plate by Garo. And like you, Levon, Garo had a birthday this week too. So happy birthday to my co-host here. And I will leave the age with you as well, yes. Garo, just like you left it for Levon. Both of you guys look extremely young to me.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much, Levon. And
thanks so much.